Hi, my name is Michael Gates, and I'm a user experience researcher and alumnus of the University of Michigan School of Information. This year, the School of Information is incorporating a theme to our client-based classes of issues around access to safe drinking water. Today, I'm interviewing Tiernan, who is the manager at the Division of Environmental Health, Chemical Response and Planning section of the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. The class I'm conducting this interview for is SI 501 Contextual Inquiry and Consulting Foundations. Our students will be learning about problems and opportunities with drinking water while learning qualitative research skills like interviewing and contextual inquiry. Jerry, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Well, to start off, can you tell us at a high level about drinking water contamination as it relates to your role at the Department of Health and Human Services?
Yeah, so my role is planning for the response functions necessary to kind of address emergency situations dealing with drinking water, in particular, both point source, so wells pulling out of the ground, and also municipal water systems like Blewa here in the Detroit area.
What kind of responses do you have to coordinate?
Yeah, so we coordinate responses all the way from things that, in a lot of aspects, lead in drinking water, activations throughout the state. The historical infrastructure was previously used a lot of lead lines. Those lead lines still remain in place in many communities, and so we do a lot of response efforts around maintaining reduction of childhood lead exposure, both from drinking water and from other lead sources. The other bigger role that we play is with evaluating potential releases in an emergency situation. The Enbridge oil spill from the 2010s, 850,000 gallons of oil into a river watershed system, things of that nature. So those are our two big areas specific with drinking water.
For those unfamiliar, what happens whenever a human ingests lead at high levels?
So it really comes down to the highest at risk for lead exposure are children and pregnant people. So it is a developmental brain developmental disorder. I'm a geologist, so my whole career until I came to the health department a couple of years ago was saying go talk to that person about that exact question. But I have been here long enough to know that it's a developmental issue. So as children's get lead into their system, it slows their development mentally, and that is a bona fide fact back through science, multiple literature saying that that's it. So my life in a nutshell has been really trying to reduce that exposure from kids to lead. It focuses now a lot on drinking water, but in historical ways, it's been more soil and lead-based paint, because those are actually the bigger drivers of lead exposure than drinking water in particular.
Okay. And you mentioned oil spillage. I'm curious if you could kind of elaborate more on the impact of that.
So in most cases, when you talk about like an oil spill, on an above ground oil spill, you're more worried about, okay, it got into the water, and now it's traveling down the water, and maybe a municipal system has an intake into that water body. There's multiple drinking water intakes in Michigan type systems that draw directly from a lake. You can put it on a map, and I can tell you their pickup is right there at a depth. You could point to it. That's not really true because most of them are kind of hidden for security, like bigger security reasons. I don't even know where they are than generic. But in most of the overland spills, you're actually more worried about there being a potential that it would expose like a drinking water well for a property. So a property has a private well. That well is maybe 30 feet from the river, and now that river is completely flooded with the crude oil. It is not unlikely that that could end up in that well. It isn't highly likely, but it's not a zero threat. So those are the bigger issues. And again, that's just drinking water. Most situations, an overland oil spill, our first concern isn't drinking water. It's inhalation of the chemical. It could be obviously a fire hazard, depending on what kind of oil you're talking about, whether it's flash points or things are worse. But
Well, I know these are very complex issues. I'm curious if you could go over some of the biggest problems related around them.
yeah, I think from the context of where I am, where our agency is working right now, it is, the two bigger problems around contamination are lead and PFAS. Polyfluorohydrocarbons. I always screw up the name. but there's a whole group of chemicals, about 5,000 of them. They're labeled as the forever chemicals. The earliest ones were very long chain chemicals, and those chemicals do not break down in the environment, nor do they break down in the human body, at least not quickly. So there's a lot of work. Your 3M Scotch Guard on your furniture, your non-stick paint coatings, all from back in the time, 50s, 60s, 70s. All of that was actually pretty bad, and it didn't really come to a head until the late 90s, early 2000s, and not even in Michigan until, into the early, 2015s where it really took off. And then lead is just, again, that is a historical legacy that we will fight, probably for the rest of our existence in this space, because it never gets created nor destroyed. It just gets moved. So I can take the lead out, but I still got to put it somewhere. And there's still always going to be a risk where I put that lead. We just design it so that that risk is minimized as much as possible.
So we've heard the term forever chemicals a lot.
Mhm.
Here's exactly what that means. Does that mean that they're just going to be around forever? There's no way to dilute them or get rid of them? And I guess the same would that be true for the human body?
Yeah, so, the old adjective solution of pollution's dilution is true only from the standpoint that you're talking about a amount of chemical, a volume of chemical in space. So if you take that volume and then you dump it into a 50,000 gallon, tank, you slowly disappears, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that chemical isn't still in that water. Forever chemicals, in the end, you can send them, you can dilute them, you can do everything, but that chemical never changes. In these early PFAS, that's what happened in the environment. They do not break down naturally. Gasoline, I mean, for all intents and purposes, most gasoline products dumped on the ground in a quantity, say a 5 gallon bucket spills of gas on the ground on a really hot day in a big open field. It's actually not a huge risk. I mean, if you're smoking right there, it could be. But ultimately, if you just walked away and came back even 30 or 40 minutes later, there's very little left of it. It's actually volatilized into the air. It's changed. It's moved, and now it's dissipated in the air. It's not that big of a deal. The forever chemicals don't do that. So once the PFAS is in the environment, there's no real way to get rid of it. I can absorb it to things, meaning I could run water through carbon. I can do things to grab the PFAS, but it never breaks it down. All it does is, again, it takes it from one media, puts it onto another media, and now I have a new media. But I still have to worry about the overall. What do I do with that now? And right now, it's really just, it's getting better. But for a while, because no one knew what to do with it, they were just basically just stockpiling it. Like, we don't know what to do with it yet, but we know we don't want to put it back in the ground until we figure it out. So they just keep stockpiling it. But we are learning ways to remove it from the environment, so at least you've disconnected the exposure risk of it. But I still have the chemical over there in a different form.
So what are some of the biggest challenges in trying to address these problems?
Both have very similar things, which is most environment, is they just need more resources. Ultimately, the lead issue comes down to, I mean, the number one way to get rid of lead in the system is to remove the lead lines from the system. Some systems have a lot of money, their communities have a lot of money, they dealt with those issues, or they have dealt with those issues in ways that are great. Other communities have not had those opportunities, haven't taken care of those opportunities, or just haven't had that opportunity. And again, the state of Michigan is taking a much larger approach than just my little narrow pocket of the world in funding and working with communities to get those lead lines out really as fast as they can, because that'll be the quickest way out of that exposure. The PFAS world comes down to really the feds and a lot of aspects, EPA and others picking up the ball. The feds can be difficult at times, and we all know the history of what's happened over the last maybe 10 years at the federal level, specifically with EPA. So there's been a lack of leadership for a long period of time on PFAS in particular. And Michigan, Minnesota, California, and a couple other states, New Jersey, were really pushed to drive science in ways that we hadn't had to do in the past, because usually the feds would be driving that science and we would take that science and then adopt that science, but they weren't moving the science. They were just saying everything's fine. 70 is our number. And we're coming up with numbers on the House side into and we're talking parts per trillion, by the way, not parts per million or parts per billion. We're talking parts per trillion. Feds are saying, well, 70 is somewhere in there. And we have numbers at like 1, 2, 3. So there was a significant gap there. And we're still fighting that out actually in court in Michigan right now. It's still going through the Supreme Court of Michigan on whether or not it was set up legally and enforceable.
When you said we have
those
numbers
low
of one, two,
numbers.
three, I'm not exactly sure what that means. Could you explain that?
So the level, the feds say, hey, if I test water and it comes back with, say, the chemical PFOS, which is a very specific compound that is considered to be one of the PFAS compounds, they say if you get it at 70 or below, you're fine. But when our scientists and toxicologists run the numbers, they say that number should really say if you're drinking it at higher than 3, it's a problem. Lower than 3, and you're okay. That's a significant gap, especially you're talking parts per trillion, which again, for some of us older scientists, it was really hard for us to grasp parts per trillion because for the last 20 years, we've been talking about parts per billion. And now all of a sudden we got, I'd say PhDs saying you should be worried about parts per trillion. And someone like me is trying to find this stuff is like, how do I find this stuff at parts per trillion? We've never heard of that. And that alone took us 2 years to really get to the point where we were confident that the data we were collecting was at such a granular level to be able to see a part per trillion. So
Yeah, I had no idea. Can you name any information or tech opportunities in addressing these challenges?
So I think the biggest area for technology that benefits us is the ability to take these very complicated science concepts, data summaries, tables, figures, and get, again, I keep saying AI just because I'm not the most tech savvy guy, but it's almost like what I want to be able to do is take all my science, I want to give it to somebody and say, I need to figure out how to make this teachable to these people that are in front of me. And again, when I walk in as a geologist and give this presentation, almost like I'm giving, I know that the average citizen caught very little of what I tried to say. And so when it comes down to technology, especially the way I see young people wanting to use it, it's not going to be them listening to some old guy like me just telling them. It's going to be these very interactive ways of teaching people that lead is bad, that these chemicals are bad. And again, I feel like I'm old and my mind's not nimble enough. And I'm, talking to the people that'll be watching this saying, I really see them as being like, these are the ideas on how to get that information out to more people. And technology is going to do that. And, I had the old floppy drives. I had the old floppies like this when I started. So,
Oh, wow.
it's like I saw everything happen and now I just know that it won't be me moving it. It'll be, the people in your classes that are making these connections and really driving that to that next level. So
It sounds like, taking your career's work and just trying to organize it and then communicate it in such a way that it still explains like a multitude of issues, but it's just clearer to, John Q. public.
yeah, well, and even training the next generation. I'm sure every generation has this exact same thought. So it's not like I'm recreating, like I've made some big epiphany. I just got old enough to make that realization that you've learned a lot. And a lot of it is just getting lost on that newer group because you're so disconnected from the front line. So it's not like I'm in with them every day, but how do I get that? And I think technology is that brace at some point. Again, AI makes it the easiest versus this idea that I download my brain to some computer and then that computer then moves forward for the rest of life, assuring that those information gets used moving forward. But that is way too simple. So that doesn't, and I don't know how that works. I just, hope that these kind of conversations help from the standpoint of, well, what were we working on when we got so old that our minds became so nimble? It was like, well, I'm just going to do what I know because I got too much happening. So I can't now drive the science. I just got to respond.
So when you've been doing your presentations or just communicating in general with the public, what's been effective for you?
For me personally, it really is plain languaging. Like we call it plain languaging. The standpoint is basically, so I've been a scientist for a very long time and I have people that have been health educators for a very long time. So I tell them what I want to say and they help me craft that message. The cool thing is that I'm really good at going into a group and pitching the idea and getting camaraderie for the idea and stuff. But I have a hard time getting from, hey, I got 1,000 things in my mind. They're all going to be great, but how do I identify what's the best for this particular audience so that they'll grab what I'm saying? Otherwise, I just give everyone the fire hose, right? I just open it up, I just blab the whole thing, and I go, good luck, everybody. And they help us say, no, 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 no. This group needs this information. Out of all the things you want to say, you need to focus on this. They give me nice scripts. They give me, and that's where it's that technology where I'm really working with, hey guys, like we got 15 geologists over here. Now I've got like 10 data people. Like 20 years ago, I had all these geologists. We did all of that work. Now we have people that do it for us. And how do we make that work? And long term, how does that really build out program based response efforts? So I'm not doing this every time a response happens, having to recreate this new technology every time. So, or the use of that technology every time is probably more appropriate.
I'm curious if in the course of your work, does anything come to mind in terms of information or tech opportunities that would make your job easier?
So what we struggle with right now is, to be honest, at the longest scale, not honest, but the biggest issue ends up being we have high quality data sets. We have spent a lot of time assuring that my epi data sets are awesome. And when we're doing tox work, it's awesome. It's geology, it's awesome. What we work with now, we're trying to build are these relationship databases that will allow us to clearly basically go, this location in Michigan has had these things happen. And being able to really put like a storyboard for somebody. Hey, I've lived in this community. What's going on? Oh, where do you live? Oh, boom, you press a button. My databases will pull everything that's happened around you. Again, there's all sorts of liability with names and stuff. But again, it's de-identified data. It's the idea that I'm trying to teach. You live in a house, you live in this community, you can go to a website and it's going to identify risks around you. Then again, a lot of those risks aren't anyone's responsibility but your own. Some are other people's responsibilities, and these databases will help you tell that. But again, the average citizen has to go to 7 databases. They need to know very specifically what they asked for. I want to, so they go in, they type their address, and boom. And we've been talking about this for 20 years, and it's slowly happening. But again, we're talking about database systems that way eclipse my understanding of multi-relationship databases. And I'm using those databases to both query and then turn around and present. It's all gone beyond. Like to me, that's the next level of understanding of this stuff. That I probably will never get, or by the time I do, it'll be so late in my career, it'll be like, oh man, I hope you guys can do this for the next generation.
Are these databases all run by the state government?
Yes, but again, everything's becoming, in a lot of aspects, it's who has the data. Can I get the type of transparency that I think government should have, which is, I don't care why you have the data. Don't caveat the data. Give me the data. You don't need to give me an interpretation of it. I don't need it. I just want you to give me the data. In a lot of aspects, I have the problem with, I know you have the data, and I know I have smart people that'll do the data. So give me your data. And they're like, no, we want to know what you're using it for. I'm like, I don't even know, but you have data and I have smart people. I want smart people to see smart data. So I've always been arguing that I have nothing to hide as a government agency because everything I'm doing is transparent. So once I get a data set, as long as I did it right, I should never fear giving it to anybody because it's science. And in the science world, the only thing I had was the document that says very specifically, what did we do? Why did we do it? Here's the results of what we did. It's not really up for interpretation. Like what the results of all that might mean for the next step is up for interpretation. But what I put together is nothing but we went out this date, this time, did this work, did this per method, did it. Boom. It's not rocket science, right? So in my mind, those are, that's it. So,
All right. Well, I'm wondering if you had a magic wand and could change one thing around addressing contamination at large, or in particular dealing with your work, what would it be?
the magic wand would be money, i.e. resources to remove lead lines. Like environmental remediation. There's two big buckets right there. You always have the liability. Do you, as the liability of contamination, wish to manage said liability in perpetuity, meaning you wish to mitigate the issue? I'm going to put a cap over it, but I'm going to leave all that stuff there, and then you're going to ride it out. Like that's one way to deal with it. The other is to remove it. So I'm going to go in there and get it out. So we have over the last 50 years identified lead's a problem. We need to get it out of our system, and we've taken small somewhat incremental steps, but not enough to mitigate or put a Band-Aid on the situation. My wand would be, we're not Band-Aiding the situation. We're getting these lead lines out of the community once and for all to never come back to our community. And then go from there to removing all these other lead sources that get a lot more complicated because it's not a single house. It might not even be a single area. It could be multiple areas. It could be all sorts of different factors on how an individual child could be exposed to lead. I just want to knock the water one off the table and say it's out. You don't have to worry about their water. It's good. And now you can get into the individual's homes, the individual's areas that they're living in, where that environment might have the lead that they're being exposed to.
Can you give us an insight into like the size or scope of the lead line issue in Michigan?
$1 billion price tags.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's really expensive. It's not cheap. So again, some of your bigger communities that have had a lot of, I mean, it's even, it gets very political. How about that? The answer to a lot of those questions gets so political that if I just focus on the science, I do better. The science is the lines are still there. And if we remove the lines for whatever reason, I don't care if it's bad prior management of that system, you know, the inadequate of state government or the federal government, like to me, Miss Jones and Mr. Jones do not care. All they know now is they got a lead line problem. They want it removed. And if they're asked to pay out of pocket, they can't overcome that. Some of the houses aren't even worth the value that it would take for that to actually come in and replace that lead line. So it has to be done at a higher level. And again, a lot of communities are definitely doing this. And I don't mean Flint in a negative, I mean Flint in a positive. You know, things that came out of that situation were this understanding that one of the issues that happened there was you had these lead lines there. And then when there was a concern with the source of the water, it was amplified because the lead lines were still there. Had the lead lines been removed, the issue may have still been a problem, but it wouldn't have manifested itself in lead being distributed throughout the system. Again, managing a mitigation long term versus I'm just going to go get it out of there. And now I never have to worry. Things could happen crazy, but I'll never have to worry about it because the lead lines are gone. So.
How many lead lines or feet of lead lines are in the state that you wish you could remove?
Good question. You know, when you asked your last question, I'm like, he's going to get it more into the specifics. And to be honest, without having the PowerPoints up, my brain doesn't work that way. I
Totally
just
okay.
compartmentalize it as there's still a lot. I know the communities, but even then we're a little bit coy with wanting to announce that we know that that community is bad because it leads to a context on a community that probably isn't there. And that's where we get to this. It gets so political, even us being able to say out loud some of the things that we're trying to do because the how it's looked at in a political sense is turned on us in a way that's not was our intent. I'm not a liberal. I'm not a conservative. I'm not anything. I'm trying to get Miss Jones and Mr. Jones' kid to not end up having lead in their system. And I don't care how it happened before. I just care about what we're going to do now. And, you know, that might be my second magic wand would be all political aside from lead. Never another political discussion. It'll be only based on the implementation need to remove those moving forward. And there will be no discussion on politics. It'll just be this community's got it worse. That's where we're going to start. And we go from there.
I've been talking
But that's
to you
not
guys.
reality in state government. It's not reality in any government, to be honest. It just isn't. And us as scientists need better technology to convince the people that don't care about science that it's real. That's probably even more. COVID really showed that. You know, my people are calling me, telling me, hey, man, you should be doing this. They're PhDs. And then I got friends of mine that are telling me I'm full of crap. I'm like, guys, you don't yell at me. You're telling me that I should listen to you. I've watched you pump gas for 4 years. Not a bad job. When we grew up together, I pumped gas with you too. You do what you do now. I started working with PhDs on these types of issues. And again, I'm not telling you you're right or wrong, but technology helped convince those people that what we did was wrong, that the science was wrong, which means there's got to be a technology advance there for us to do just the opposite, which is just go just the opposite, convince those people that we're actually right, that the science is right, and that we're not just not malarkey, and that things that you don't understand don't mean that they're not true. And to be honest, I always consider myself to be the poster case because I know geology for 17, but I don't know all the rest of that stuff. Which is why we surround ourselves with smart people that know that and then lean on them as teams to say, you bring you, I bring me, and together, Mr. and Mrs. Jones get their protection.
So in talking to you, I'm kind of left with one kind of big picture question. Like, I don't know the scope of which how how many children are currently be affected by lead lines in the state.
So there's some good questions, and I could probably follow up because again, we have epidemiologists. So I'm sure that if I ask the question, we track it kind of in a percent of what they call EBLL, so elevated lead in blood testing for children. So if a child in Michigan goes to their provider, is given a test, and that test comes back above 3.5, the state does respond. Both to a medical sense in getting that child stabilized from the potential effects of the lead exposure, but also in identifying the source and looking to remediate that source from that child's. So anything that we do leads to the whole idea that that level comes down. And over the last 50 years, what they find is that that level does come down, but it's not coming down as fast as we had hoped. And the recognition was because we kept dealing with lead as individual source issues. So that group was over there dealing with water, and this group over there was dealing with like paint, and this group over here was dealing with this. And what happened in Flint was a realization that you can't do it that way. Bring them all together. So my agency is actually that first attempt, not first attempt, but the attempt in Michigan to say, bring all your lead exposure programs into one umbrella. And over the last 3.5, 4, 5 years, that's what we've worked to do is basically how does that umbrella operate to Mr. and Mrs. Jones's child being protected in a planned and organized fashion that included everybody at the table. So,
well, my last question for you. Our students will be spending the semester investigating a specific problem around drinking water or potentially drinking water contamination specifically. Knowing that, is there anything about this topic that I should have asked you that I didn't?
I really don't think so. I think I mean, all the relevant questions are there. Again, in my mind, a lot of it trying to think about the students in the class and what they're training to build. It's really how am I going to use this technology that seems to be happening everywhere in the private sector? So I hear private sector all the time. Oh, we're using chat, we're using this, we're using that. That stuff just hasn't happened at the government level. And a lot of that becomes because it's proprietary and they want high dollar for it. And again, I've always, I was in private sector and now I'm in the public sector, and there's always that yin and the yang between, where would you go? I think one of the questions would be, how do I convince students that the dollar's awesome and that your work could go to making technology that'll make people a lot of money, but there's also a very, very big area where public health can benefit from that, and it's not money based. It's not going to make you a millionaire per se. It could, but again, for us, it's more about learning and really wanting to make. Again, I always drive back to Mr. and Mrs. Jones just because that's really where our focus is, and building technology that helps that individual protect themselves versus limiting liability for a company or even the liability of another state agency. That would, and I don't know what there would be a question there, but more of a career, we all have that career as, oh, you want to go private or you want to go public. And
No, I
the
get that.
reasons why one goes to the other is different. And
Well, with the skills they're learning, I mean, sure, a lot of students want to go to, Google or companies like that. So I was in my cohort, but you could certainly go into something like what we've been discussing and
or
make
even convincing, it's not even that. I mean, I guess it is that, but it's the idea that, those companies, as they grow, they get more ability to help in those aspects. And so the more that I think I would be telling those types of students that as you get into those jobs, not forgetting that while you're making a lot of money, a lot of the effort could be used on the public sector to help people as well. I'm not against the idea that a company makes money off of something, but it's that idea that you expand it to think about other ways it could be used that might not make you money, but would still be a benefit to the communities in which you're trying to serve. And so,
well, I think that's a great note to end it on. Thanks
okay,
again for making time to talk to us. It's very much appreciated.
cool. All right, thank you very much.